Hey, I'm Stephen Glosser.
And I'm Megan Pikert.
Welcome to the Going Somewhere podcast.
A podcast for anyone who finds themselves in the ambiguous adventure of young adulthood.
A season that's marked by uncertainty, change, love, heartbreak, and a whole lot of big decisions.
Join us for some real conversations as we dig into what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus in this beautiful yet complicated season of life.
We're so glad you're here, and we'd love to have you join our little Going Somewhere podcast community. Follow us on Instagram at goingsomewhere.podcast and join the conversation.
We're all going somewhere. We might as well go there together.
Thanks for listening. Let's jump into today's episode. This week's episode of the Going Somewhere podcast. I'm Stephen, and I'm joined by...
Hey, it's Megan.
Hey, it's Megan. Yes, Stephen and Megan back. We just came out of a couple live episodes from Rhythm Conference, and so we're kind of getting back to the normal groove. We're going to have some topical episodes. We're going to start interviewing some more guests, but I'm pumped. Are you pumped, Megan?
I'm always pumped. It's a good time to be back on the Going Somewhere podcast. It's so fun. But today, we're going to chat about something that's really fun. Just talking about churches. And I think it's a great time to talk about it just after Rhythm Conference too, after coming from trying to find community. We met a lot of young adults that we didn't know before Rhythm Conference. So a lot of people that are looking for a church are going back to their community, trying to get plugged in as well. Yeah.
So this week, it's all about finding a church home. And we realize that there's some of you listening today that that's like a pressing need, that you are in the process of being in a new place, new town. You're getting ready to graduate college, and that's something that's on your mind. For some of you, that's not the season you're in. But I just want to encourage you to lean into this conversation, because statistics show that your first job will likely not be your last job, and you may love the place you're in now, but you might find yourself in a place where you're like, oh no, I have to restart. So we just want to give some handles to that part of life, and knowing that there's some people that are going through that right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that you'll probably get asked about it too. I feel like it's a common conversation between me and my friends, or even long distance friends, of like, hey, we're trying to find a church again. And so being able to just offer advice or speak into it, give some, just advice for anyone going in the season, even if it's not you too.
Yeah, for sure. And in this episode, Megan and I are both going to share some of our personal experiences. But yeah, Megan, when you think of this topic, just kind of what comes to mind personally for you?
Yeah. Well, I think I've gone through different seasons of church shopping. I don't really like that language, but it's the language that's most common. But honestly, it feels really daunting, and it feels kind of stressful to find a church. Obviously now I'm very plugged in working at a church, but going through seasons of that, it's kind of nerve-wracking and can feel a little bit isolating and lonely if you don't have community already. And I've gone through seasons where I've moved away, come back, and so I kind of get it a little bit. But I'm excited to talk about it, because it's something that I think is really important, to get plugged into a church and to find a church for all the reasons, for the right reasons, for figuring out what you want in a church too is really important, and what is going to keep you rooted within a church too. So, but for you guys, you've also kind of moved away, come back, tried different churches too. So what comes to mind for you when you think about the topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I have worked in a church for a majority of my adult life. And so really wasn't until, we moved to New Jersey that we had the first experience of like, oh, we actually have to do this now. And so I definitely learned a lot from that, realized, the power of existing friendships. The first church we attended was because that's where our friends went. And then COVID happened, and that church was closed for about 2 years. So we just got to a point where we're like, hey, we need to gather with people again, and we need to find a church. So that was kind of when we went in blind, not knowing anybody. And it was like a really challenging experience, but actually at the same time, it was super life-giving. And I think that's what I want for people, is that this is an opportunity to really press in and to say, man, these are going to be formative people in my life. This is a formative community in my life. And I want to view it as that. Like, I don't want to just view it as like the place I attend on Sundays. Like, church is so much more than that. And I think that's at the heart of this conversation for me is, why do we even talk about it? Because church is more than a place to be spiritually fed. I think as we progress in life, meaning as we get older, I'm progressing in life. It's just a nicer way to say that. I think there's a temptation, a pull, a gravitational pull to just kind of settle into more of like a, you know, I'm just going to get by. Like, I'm just going to attend. I want my kids to be in church, so I'm just going to plug them in. But the reality is church is more than just a place to be spiritually fed. It's a community to belong to contribute, to carry out the Great Commission together. So I think it's a really important conversation. So the goal of this conversation is to really give some practical steps and some encouragement for people that are in the search or that might be down the road. And just the reality is like there is no such thing as a perfect church. And we could it's kind of like finding a spouse in a lot of ways.
Where are you going with this?
I mean, like if you have a list, so I remember early in college, I made a list of all the qualities that I wanted a future spouse.
Do you still have it?
I probably do. It's probably folded in a notebook, and it was probably like 63 points long. It was just like everything that you could ever, but it wasn't realistic. There's no human that could fit that mold, you know? And the beautiful thing is I feel like it got better than that. It was just not what I thought that 18-year-old Stephen wanted. And I think in a church, we could have a list of 83 things based on our past experiences, based on, you know, how we feel, but that church isn't going to exist. So I think it's important to just realize like the barriers and the limitations to this too. And I think the perspective too that we have that's a little bit unique is that you and I meet a lot of people that are looking for a church. And so we oversee what's called Growth Track at our church. And we're constantly meeting people that are in the hunt for a church or that maybe have just decided. And so we get to hear a lot of stories. We get to hear a lot of reasons for why Northview is the church that they choose. And I think it helps me speak into this topic with a little bit more gusto in the sense that I have my own experience, but I also have seen people in this process hundreds of times, and I understand what it is that helps them. So you ready to jump in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. What's the first thing we're going to be talking about?
All right. So before we kind of give some encouragement to finding a church, we wanted to address some of the roadblocks.
Ooh.
So what are some of the barriers that make it hard to find a church to get plugged in? And so the first roadblock we're going to address is that you just don't know where to start. And I think that's a lot of my story is I just had no idea. I was immediately plugged in to Northview in college. So then when I moved away, it was like the first time that I had to go figure it out. And like, I didn't just have someone that was inviting me to a Sunday service or to a event at a church. And so that can be really hard. It's just, you kind of feel paralyzed, which I think is an overarching young adult thing, is that you just you don't know where to start.
That's a core emotion
yes.
to young adulthood.
I think so. I think like if I were to think about every single area of my life, a lot of it feels like I just don't know where to start. I feel ignorant in a lot of ways. And so I am not surprised that this is a main roadblock. And yeah, moving to a new city, starting a church, starting to find community, even just make a friend, seems really daunting. And then when you go to a church, it's even bigger. There's more people, and there's just, you can kind of get caught in comparison. We'll talk about a little bit later too, of people already have their friends. So it makes it hard to just not know where I should go, what denomination, should I be close to my house, should I be further away, you know, all those things. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, I think that does trip people up a lot, is especially, I mean, depending on where you go, because I feel like if you're moving back home where there's two churches and they're on the opposite ends of the block, you know where to start. But I think the person in our context, a lot of people move to the cities, like it's kind of that big city. People come from Minnesota and they end up back there a lot. And when you go into the cities, depending on where you are, the churches, it feels endless of like churches, good churches that you can be a part of. And so I think that can just be paralysis at times. But I think, we're going to talk about this a little later, but I think the beauty of it too is what's available online. You can learn about a church. And I think they're, obviously they can paint whatever picture through their website or through their social media that they want. But at the same time, you get a feel for what they believe. You get to get a feel for what church looks like, or their, I feel like even watching a service, you get to engage in it that way. And so I think that's something that can help overcome that roadblock. But I definitely understand that is a big thing. What's another thing that people might get caught up in?
Yeah, another kind of roadblock is just feeling tired of hopping around trying to find a church. There's so many options that you're trying all of them, and if nothing's sticking or nothing's sticking out to you, it can just be exhausting trying to find a place that feels like home and feeling like you're striking out time and time again.
Yeah, the fatigue
Mm-hmm.
of doing this for 6 months, especially when you come from a strong church community where you really felt at home, and whether that's where you grew up at and you're like, man, my family's been rooted in this church for 18 years or 20 years and now I'm starting over again, or you just come from a really great experience in college or whatever, it can get exhausting really fast because you know there's a lot of things that go into this. So number 3 is the comparison trap. I think a roadblock is definitely feeling like this church isn't like my old church. I think that is something that I hear, that I've heard a lot, especially when I was a college pastor, was we'd have students that moved away every year. Like that was just the norm, was students would leave, they would go somewhere else, and then we would check in on them often and they'd be like, yeah, it's just not like it was. It's not like Chi Alpha, or it's not like X, or it's not like Y. And I think that part of that is just natural, but then part of that is a comparison of just like, man, I won't be able to settle into a church until I find one just like the one I came from. Why do you think that is difficult or dangerous?
Ooh, I mean, I think it leads to long term, it leads to just discontentment and, yeah, just not them being rooted wherever the Lord called you to be. So it makes a bigger conversation when you start to believe that, oh, this isn't like it was, or this isn't meeting my expectation. And it I think, starts to make church about you and how you're feeling. And in my opinion, church is not consumer based,
Mm-hmm.
like you mentioned earlier, you don't go there to get fed spiritually. And so when you start to compare your old church, it leads to discontentment, and maybe it makes you not able to experience all that the Lord has for you in that season. Differences are what makes it so awesome, and you might meet new people that you would have never met at your old church or at a previous place you attended, just because it didn't feel or seem the same on the surface. Or
Yeah. No, I think that's huge. I think even just that idea of, I think there is like a mourning experience oftentimes when you leave a positive experience, when you leave somewhere that it helped you grow. And again, that's, as a college pastor, that's what I would see time and time again, is college was the place that their faith became real, or they became a Christian. And now they're leaving that community that was so formative to them. There's a natural like mourning process that you have to go through, and lean into that. Like lean into the fact that, man, I am grateful for this. I won't have this again. That is hard, and you have to face that. But then as fast as you can and as best you can, like live in that new reality of like, today's a new day. God is, his mercies are new every day. Like the same God that I met and encountered in this setting, he's still in this new setting. And like, if you can change to like find the good, and our eyes will constantly look for those qualities that we had in the past, but it's like, no, lean into that as best you can, saying like, what is it that is here? How can I embrace this new season? And that's a job too. Like when you move into a new job, it's the same thing. Is there's going to be the things from the past job that you miss and the people that you miss, but focus on building the new relationships, focus on finding the new rhythm, and that's going to help you a lot. So I think that's a big one. What's number 4?
number 4 is fear of commitment. which means it's just easy to stay as a visitor sometimes as a church. It's as a church attendee, it's easy to kind of keep everything at arm's length. For me, that's kind of how I felt when I moved to Indiana and I was church shopping. Was just I had a very temporary mindset of I'm not going to be here forever. So what's the point in getting plugged in? And I think for me that ended up making me lose out on a lot of months of community and a lot of months of really being excited to go to church and everything, because I came and went as fast as possible, which is funny now working at a church because I'm like, oh, I just don't want anyone to ever get in and get out without being noticed. And
Right.
but it was like that was me. I was doing everything I could to not be noticed, and because I didn't want to commit. I didn't want to just be all in for it. And so it made me just not put down my roots as fast, and which was just a bummer.
Yeah.
I have a regret about that now of just, oh man, what would it have been like to have those 6 months actually plugged into a life group and to serving and being committed there?
For sure. No, that's huge. I think that's, something that we really leaned into, probably in the opposite way of like when we started. It was a church called True North Church in New Jersey. I have a lot of friends there to this day, admire them a ton. It was really actually healing for us, like the experience that we had there, but it was only really like 4 months. And early on, we kind of knew it was only going to be 4 months, but we just really said, I mean, every part of us thought to ourselves, like, we're only here for 4 months. We knew when we were moving back to North Dakota, we knew what was coming. Yet something in us just really felt like, no, let's lean into this experience. Let's lean into this church, into these people. And God really used that season to bring healing into our life, to change our perspectives on things, to give us an experience of church that we honestly didn't quite think was possible. And we're so grateful for that season, but we would have never experienced it if we wouldn't have leaned in the way we did, which is huge. And then the fifth roadblock is doctrinal or cultural differences. Churches may feel different based on the region or community they serve. And I think sometimes this can be a roadblock to engage in a church where I think not everybody has the opportunity, but when you can, and you're doing your research, if there's certain things that are important to you or you are affiliated with the denomination, like lean into that. But not always is that the case. And I think sometimes we have to and we're going to talk about like, do they preach the Bible? Are they Bible believing people? Are there people in the church that try to live it out in their everyday life? Do they believe in the power of God? Like there's some bare minimums that might not be exactly how you think or how you believe. But I think that's something that God can help you engage with. And I think that's where you were talking earlier, like we get to learn from other people and their experience, and then we get to bring our experience and our perspective. And I think a lot of really cool things can take place when you choose to say, hey, I know we're different. I know we think differently, maybe act differently, but there's a lot we can learn from each other. I think of friends that come from African churches that I meet. Worship is very different to them. And we could stand arm's distance apart, or we could recognize like, well, that's something that we can learn from each other in how we express worship. So I think through those roadblocks, it kind of shapes for us a little bit of the advice that we're going to share now of just some of the practical things to what to look for and how to find that church. But I think a few just encouragements as we kind of transition. The first one is just, it's okay if this process takes time. Like this is something that it's not going to happen on week one, or rarely it will happen on week one. Oftentimes it takes a couple months. It takes some time to just feel this out. So I think that's one of the encouragements is just, it's going to take some time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also just a reminder, there's no perfect church. And so, but there is a church that God would want you to join and be plugged into, and that he wants you to be a part of the body of Christ. And so just remembering that just reframing your expectations of, I'm not going for perfection, but I'm going for some place that I feel like a member of the body of Christ.
Yeah. And I think too, part of that encouragement with the no perfect church thing is if you go into finding a church with the end goal, if your end goal is just to find a church that you feel good at, that it feeds you, you're going to eventually not feel that in most places. Something's going to change, a new pastor comes, whatever. But if you go into it with the goal of, I want to find the church, so I'm going to weed through some things, I'm going to take my time, I'm going to test a few different churches out. But if your end goal is to find a place to be planted in, that's where people flourish. You know, Psalm 1 and other Psalm 91 or 92, it talks about being planted in the house of God and you flourish in the house of God. And I think that if that's the goal, then when you make that commitment, when you're like, hey, this is my church, you just lean into that with everything. You know, you're not looking for ways out. You're not looking for reasons to disengage and to engage somewhere else. It's like, no, this is my church. The pastor changed, but I'm going to be faithful, loyal to this church. I'm going to continue to use my gifts to build this church. So I think that's another part of that too. And then also with this, again, we're going to get into some practical things, but the place you're moving to is going to make this different. And so if you're moving to a big city, think through it with that lens. If you're moving into a small town, or if that's kind of your end goal is like, I want to be a farmer, I want to take over my dad's farm someday, like think through it with that lens, because some of this is going to really resonate and some of this is going to be like, you don't know my hometown. You're like, you don't know where I'm going back to. So just take that into account as we go through this, and then just have grace and patience and prayer in this process. Like that's one of the biggest things we can encourage you is pray through this process. So let's dive into what to look for in a church. Ooh, this is fun. Mm-hmm. What's the first thing?
All right. First thing, biblical teaching. That's a solid foundation. You know, you want to make sure that they are preaching the authority of scripture, you know, like, do they understand the gospel? Basics here of just, is the church committed to the authority of scripture, that it is the inspired word of God? Being considerate of, is it a style thing or a doctrine thing? You know, are you, do you want expository? Is that topical? Or I mean, expository versus topical?
Yeah. Expository would be like, we're going to preach through Matthew verse by verse.
Yeah. So it's like going through a book of the Bible, very much like that. Whereas topical, you know, is going through different topics every week. And so, but no matter how they preach, is it biblical teaching? Can you take it back to scripture? And that's good for anything, is always comparing whatever anyone says back to scripture and just, making sure that aligns as well. Doctrine matters, prioritizing, are they Jesus centered? Are they spirit filled? Are they, Bible believing church?
Yeah. When I think, major on the majors, minor on the minors. So like, that's the thing, especially if you're in a smaller town and there's, you're not talking 18 churches to choose from. It's like, do they believe, that Jesus is the way? Do they preach that salvation is not upon works, but it's on grace and it's the cross? And, I think that's the best and first place to start, and then go from there. Like, again, for me, being a part of a spirit-filled church is important. And so, but what does that mean? Does that mean like a charismatic expression every day? There's a lot of, whether it's spiritual gifts in operation in church settings, or, I had some encounters growing up where it's like flags in the aisles and all that stuff. Like, no, that's not what it means. But do they teach the power of the Holy Spirit? Are there opportunities to engage with the Holy Spirit on a regular basis, or just in a consistent basis? So I think it's really honing in on those core things, and then letting the other things, the belief about, some topic or some doctrine that maybe you don't see eye to eye on, is that a deal breaker or not? And really be honest with yourself in that. What's the second thing to look for?
So the second is worship and the presence of God. So maybe a question to ask is, does the worship lead people into an encounter with God? Do you, not necessarily, you can correct me, but in worship, not necessarily feeling something necessarily, because that's not what you go into for worship, but do you feel empowered in your worship? Do you feel like this is a place that you are excited to worship God in as well?
Yeah. And I mean, and this isn't the episode. We actually recorded a really fun episode with Zach Neese a while back about worship. Worship's not just music, but in the corporate church gathering, like that worship time, it's not about song selection, but like is the presence of God a priority? Like, I think you can tell when the presence of God is not the priority of a worship service, where whether it's just going through motions or what. So it's not about feeling, but there is that aspect of like, is am I going to be able to engage in the presence of God here? You know, like that's just a healthy question to ask on that topic. But again, it's not about style of music. Like, don't. And I think that's the cool thing is I've been in settings where the music is not the norm for me, but and I even like hymn singing environments where it's like the presence of God is so evident in those environments because the people are living it and the people are embodying, you know, the worship that they're singing. So I think that's the aspect there.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. Does that make sense to you guys?
Right. Yeah. Number 3, what else should you look for in a church?
I mean, this is probably towards the top of my list too, but community and fellowship and just relationships, I think, are people welcoming? Are there ways to get plugged in? And this is, again, one of those reasons why you don't make the choice day one, because, you know, whether it's a big church, small church, give people grace. There isn't a perfect church, you know, and so you might walk into a church and not feel greeted, or nobody turned to meet you. Nobody asked you, you know, how long you've been coming here. Like, all those things might not happen. But if that happens over 4 to 6 weeks and you fill out a Connect card or whatever the follow-up system is and nobody calls back, that would be more of an indicator of like, I don't know if this church is welcoming. But just not being greeted your first Sunday, give grace. See if that's a pattern or what. Something with that too is sit in a different place. Like, you might have sat and people that grew up in church will realize, or will, this will make sense to them, but like, you might have sat in that one section that it's the same people, they come in, they come out, they are there just, but they're not the norm of that church. But you sat in the wrong section that Sunday. Like, you just walked in and that seemed like the least resistance. So you sat down, but they're there just to not get seen, not get noticed. They're in and out before the end of the message. Like, they don't want anybody to talk to them. So they're of course not going to talk to anybody else. So try somewhere else, try towards the front, try in different places that you see like more activity in, and just see what happens. But also seek it out, I think, is a big thing. But this for me was a huge part of our experience when we, you know, went to the church in New Jersey. So the other one closed during COVID. We came back from Christmas break and we're like, hey, we just need to find somewhere that's open. And New Jersey was a little bit more strict with everything. So there was this church that we had watched online a few times over Christmas break. We actually watched it a few times before then. We just really felt like we resonated with the preaching. We resonated with a lot that was going on there. And it was only 15 minutes from our house. The other church was 45 minutes from our house, but that's where our friends went. So it was like, we just wanted to go where they were. Well, this kind of created that opportunity. And on our first Sunday, we filled out the Connect card. We took it to the Next Steps area. We did all the things that we were told to do, which that's something that we'll touch on in a bit. And we met a guy, his name was Kyle. Kyle took interest in us. He asked our kids' names. That was week 1. That was awesome. We're like, oh man, Kyle was so cool. Kyle called me midweek and just said, hey, hope you're having a great week. We'd love to see you again on Sunday. Well, at that time in this church, you had to sign up for a service because of COVID. They had restrictions of how many people could be in the worship center at a time. So we had signed up for our service. So there was somebody with a clipboard outside as you're walking in, and you share your last name and they check you off. Well, we're walking up and Kyle yells from across the parking lot, the Glauser family, what's up, guys? And he checked us off, gave us a high five, gave the clipboard to somebody else, walked with us in the building, and introduced us to a life group leader. It was just like above and beyond in every way possible. But it was a welcoming church, and like people remembered our name from week 1 to week 2. When we got involved in that life group, we made friends very quickly. And for us, that was a big deal for us. And we realized that, like that was just the culture of their church. And so we really appreciated that. But that was my experience of like, over the top. I There was a lot of other things that we agreed with and that we resonated with, but there was a lot more grace because of the people and because of how they made me and my family feel, and like the way that they did kids ministry, the way that they did those things. Like we would have given allowance for other things because of how we were treated as a family.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. You just told me that story earlier today for the first time. I'm floored by that. Like this, that someone remembers your name immediately, that you can't go unnoticed, which is just really cool and makes a lasting impact for you, makes you want to come back and say hi to the people that you met and get further connected with them.
Yeah. And I think, if Kyle, if you're listening, thank you, my friend. You also changed how I engage, because like with running Alpha, I did check in for 2 years, and like my goal was to remember their name week 2 because of Kyle, because I was like, I remember how that made me feel. And, and I think that like level of welcoming was, I mean, God's just using them in powerful ways. But the thing is that was a big church, and just a little peek behind the hood a little bit. Like, I think a question for us was like, in the big church setting, we had just felt like, is that for us? Like, is that for us? And this was a church that was larger than Northview, the church that we're a part of. And they made it feel so small. Like they just made everything feel so small. And I think that was something that really stuck out to us and was really transformative to us. And I think a big ingredient to that was the welcoming environment. You just felt like family. They didn't care who we were. They didn't know who we were. They didn't know what we knew. They just cared about us and saw us and made us feel very at home. So I think that was huge. But again, that experience might not be your experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think mine's a little bit different of what sold me, but it still falls along the lines of community. But when I lived in Indiana, I was a part of a church for about 6 months, and I was attending. Like I said, I was not committed though. Fear of commitment of I just didn't go all in, but I attended on a Sunday and then tried to get plugged in to serve and everything, but it just didn't feel right. And that's different for everyone on why. And so I decided to try a different church. And so I went to another church in Indiana, and the first Sunday I walked in and I felt different. I felt comfortable there. I felt people again welcomed me, but also I ended up the first day in the previous church that I was a part of. They never mentioned life groups, and so it was really hard to find like, where's my community? How do I meet people here outside of like a lobby? And so at the second church, they actually, their announcement was, all of our life groups are full. And I was like, oh, okay, I don't know how to get plugged in.
Right.
And then immediately followed up with, but we have a really exciting announcement, and our friend, I cannot remember her name now, but just say Mary. Our friend Mary wants to come up, and it was like this woman in her 70s. She was sitting right in front of me, and she walks up to the stage, and she goes, I just have it on my heart that I'm supposed to start a Bible study for women. And so I'm just going to start that on Sunday nights. And so it's a life group, but it's also just open to anyone, any woman, any season of life. And so I was like, okay, perfect. So I joined that, and I walked in the next Sunday night for that Bible study, or that Sunday night, and it was only women in their 70s. It was just a bunch of grandmas. And I was just like, okay, I thought this was for any person in any season of life. And but like the next 4 months was the most fun I've ever had in a life group. Like they were just like a bunch of grandmas to me, and they are who I sat with on a Sunday service then. And I really got plugged into people that I wasn't expecting to. And
Yeah.
they used to bake me cookies every Sunday night.
That's so sweet.
Come home with just like a bunch of food, and they were always praying for me, invested in like my job and what I was there for. They were praying for me as I was transitioning to figure out if I was going to move home after that. Like they were just a part of that, but they were also not at all what I was expecting community to look like in a church. And so I think for me that was huge, of just people stepped up that I wasn't expecting, and but also they made it very easy, like to feel a part of it. Like
Yeah.
once I was in, I just felt like I was in. Like I had people that remembered my name the next Sunday, that invited me to sit with them, that texted me outside of it. And so community was huge for me as well.
Yeah. And I think that's a cool point, though. It's going to look different, and the expression of it might be very different than what you expect, but just lean into it. And is it present? Like, that's the question, is like, is there a community environment? Is it a place that I feel welcome? Um, Number 4 is very similar, but just opportunities for discipleship and growth. Um, you know, you might come from a church setting where it's small groups, like that's the expression of it. Well, in the new setting, it might not be small groups, and that might be an important thing you want, like smaller community. But ask somebody, like go to the place that makes the most sense to ask questions and say, hey, how can I grow in my faith here? And if they're like, yeah, I don't really know, we don't really do anything like that, like just come back next week, that would be one thing. But their expression of it might be different than what you're used to. They might say, oh, we have this group that's for some, your age, or we have a woman's Bible study, and we have a men's Bible study. I know a lot of churches that's kind of their discipleship, or they do Sunday school. And it's like, yeah, come an hour before service, and there's a Sunday school that you can attend. Like that might not be what your norm is, but lean into it. Like, is there a way for me to grow in this church? I think is the question. Keep going. Number 5 is evangelistic and outreach focused. What would you say on this one? Like, what's the thing that we're looking for?
Yeah, I think for me, I take this as, the Great Commission, that we are to go and make disciples of all nations. The mission that Jesus gave us all is to be outward focused, that we're here to invite other people into a relationship with Jesus. And that's at the end of the day, our calling. And so I think of it as just a community footprint. If the doors of this church were closed, would people notice? Do we have an impact within the community? Do people within in our day-to-day lives, coworkers, know that we attend here and feel invited and welcomed? Just like having that focus, but just also serving and being focused on reaching more people, as well as the people that regularly attend.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And I think that can be expressed in different ways, just like everything. So again, it might not be the way your church did it, but I think one thing, and I want to be careful how I say this, because every place is going to be different. But if you walk in the back and all you see is white heads, first ask yourself, where am I? Am I in Podunk, South Dakota, where the average age of this community is 75? That would be one thing. But if you're in a place where, the age average, there's lots of young adults, there's lots of young families, and you don't see any of them in this church, that might not be a reason to just never come back, but it might be a reason to ask some questions of like, what are they doing to reach young families? What are they doing to engage the next generation? So again, it's not like, I'm out, especially if you're in a small town. But I think it's a good indicator, though, of like, what are we doing to reach young families? What are we doing to engage people that don't know Jesus, that are far from him? Number 6, and I'm going to go through a couple of these fast, but number 6 is serving in mission. Does this church live out the Great Commission? Are there ways to serve? Like, is it more than just, hey, this is our church, attend it, but is this church engaging in some way, shape, or form? Are there ways to get plugged in? There's some churches that might be a small church, and the mentality is the pastor does everything. Well, that might be an opportunity for you to say, hey, I am technical and I would love to help in this way. Or do you need somebody, I don't see anybody greeting on Sundays, and, I would love to help find 5 people that could help us do that every week, and just see how the response is. Because again, you might be the culture changer. But I think it's good to look into, and that's a good quality of like, does this church have an opportunity for me to use my gifts? And again, it might look different, but can I do it? Can I find a way to do it? Number 7 is just leadership and accountability. I think, is leadership transparent and committed to shepherding people well? Again, you might not be able to see that from day one. You might not be able to see that from the outside. That's why I always encourage leaning into any opportunity to engage in the church. So For for us, that's called Growth Track. We open to answer any questions. People can ask whatever questions they want. Sometimes the biggest questions are, how do you do finances? Who makes decisions? Who's your pastor accountable to? And I think those things are big questions. I know somebody that went to a church, and when they asked some of those questions, the answer that came back was there is no board of elders. Um, there was no real oversight, and the lead pastor basically made all the decisions and had nobody to answer to. And he had shut down, like as more we that this person learned, like they had shut down a lot of those things because of friction. And it was just like, that's a red flag. Like that's a red flag if there is no structure, if there's no checks and balances, if there's no people that the path to transparency, like that trust is huge in a church.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, number 8 is peace and conviction. Talk about this one a little bit.
Yeah, I think this is huge that the Lord gives us peace beyond all understanding. And so at the end of the day, there is a level of you just got to be committed to a church and to be rooted and to take time. And but at the end of the day, you'll also have peace if you're being prayerful in it as well. And so sometimes you can really be looking at churches from like the head knowledge perspective of like trying to gather all the information, but at the end of the day, like the Lord's going to speak to your heart and give you convictions over, hey, I don't feel good about staying here. Or he's going to really give you peace about, hey, this can be a really good place to be rooted for a season. And I think that comes as in expressions in different ways for everyone. But at the core of that is to be in a prayerful mindset and to be asking the Lord to soften your heart for a church, to soften your heart towards a people, or to give you a really high level of conviction in it as well.
For sure. And again, yeah, that prayer part is so important. Like as you're praying, and again, like the goal isn't a perfect church, but is this a place that I can plant? Is this a place that I can serve? Is this a place that I can really lean into and be invested in? And so how we want to end this episode is actually just some practical steps. So that was really just some things to look for. We're just going to kind of run through this, but just some practical steps in finding a church. This isn't a 1, 2, 3 thing, but this is just some things that we've found both from experience, but also from conversations that we've had. So the first is start with prayer. And so we've talked about that one, but really bathe this whole process in prayer to really, that's the central of this all. So what's another practical step that you would take?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Next, I would just look online, use your resources. Even just looking on someone's website, you can see how up to date it is. You can watch past sermons. You can explore just ways that they have to get involved. And so, yeah, using your resources effectively, look at your online options, look at churches' websites as well.
Yeah, for sure. And even that second church we attended in New Jersey, we watched online for several weeks before we ever went in person. And that was just simply out of, our church wasn't meeting. And so we were still in kind of that limbo phase, waiting for it to open, and it just wasn't going to happen. So, but we learned a lot, whether it was like the worship expression or just how they talked about what to do next. One of the things we noticed was they gave a Bible to everybody that made a decision to follow Jesus. And it was just like, oh, they care about those things that I care about. Another practical step is to ask for recommendations. As a pastor, this is something I love. When somebody's like, hey, I'm moving. I don't like it when somebody says they're moving, but especially if they're in the region, I do know places and churches and pastors in different places, or they're a phone call away to finding it out. And so I think that's something that sometimes somebody goes to a community, and I've had it happen before where I find out later they're going to somewhere in like South Carolina or North Carolina, and they didn't ask anybody. And then I'm like, oh, you're in that town that my friend is in. Like literally I know somebody that attends a church there or is a pastor there. So just ask for recommendations, put it on social media, on Facebook, ask your pastor. And those are just great places to start. Somebody just asked me a question recently of like, hey, I'm moving to this particular suburb in Minneapolis, and it happens to be a place that one of my best friends serves as a lead pastor or as a campus pastor. And I told them, I connected them, but I also am like, it might not be for you. And so I'm going to give you a starting block, but you still get to make the decision based on what you think is best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also think just visiting multiple churches. And so I would maybe research your top 3 and start from there. Don't try and bite off more than you can chew,
Yeah.
but visit a couple different churches, try out a couple different locations, but go for a couple weeks too. Don't just go once and take that at face value,
Yeah.
but try and go, I'd say at least a month and to one church and then try another one and just compare and contrast all of your different experiences. And while you're doing that, sit at different spots like we talked about earlier. Try to go to a different part of the lobby. Part of me getting plugged in to my church in Indiana was I just hung out in the lobby and I was like, anyone want to talk to me? Anyone, just like, I'm going to go over here because there's people chatting over here. I'm going to go to the coffee shop and maybe try and start a conversation.
It requires some boldness and awkwardness, like you're inserting yourself into a family. Like, I think that's something that we have to recognize and realize is like, to them, this is normal, like what's happening today. And there's certain churches that their normal is looking for people and is looking for people that they can invite in. Like that's something that we train our staff, like ask people, how long have you been coming here? Because that's a way to find out if they're new. Instead of saying, are you new? That's weird. But
yeah, and then they've been attending for like 4 years.
Exactly.
And you're like, ooh.
Yeah. But like there's churches that are active and then there's churches that are just like, hey, this is our church. This is my normal Sunday. But that doesn't mean they're closed off. They're just in their mode. Like they're checking their kids into kids' church. They're seeing the person from their life group and they're doing all those things. But sometimes we have to insert ourselves. And that's why I say like engage when you attend. So don't just expect to just walk in and sit and listen to the sermon and be like, I did or didn't like that church. Because then you're just basing it off of the sermon and worship and that. But like I would encourage somebody to, if there's a way to get connected, fill it out. If there's a card, if there's a place to go to say I'm new, go to that place. If there's a class that they offer, like we do with Growth Track, take it. Like give yourself the best opportunity you can to engage in the church, learn about it, meet people. And that takes time to do that. But I think that's kind of the point. Like even my opinion is even to the extent of finding a group and joining it and just seeing what happens, because I just think that how else are you going to really meet people unless you put yourself out there? So I think that's something that somebody that is looking for a church, go out of your way to really lean into that experience. And again, that was us. Our first week of attending that church, they said, if you're new here, go to the Next Steps area. If you're looking for a life group, go to this area. So we went there and we said, we're new here. And they're like, oh, that's great. That's where I met Kyle, was going to the place that I was told to go. And I'm so glad I did. I might have met Kyle. I might have met a friendly person, but I went to the place that they're expecting you to go. And so, we always say we can't connect with you unless you connect with us, what we mean by that is, like, we can find you. We might happenstance run into you, but if you want to get connected, we're here for you. Like, we want you to be connected. So just taking that. And I think, like, with that too, just looking for ways to serve immediately. Like, even if you're not sure, you're on the fence, what I see a lot is that when people start to serve, they start to belong, or they start to feel they belong. So that might be a part of that first step, is just not just attending, but I'm going to find that way to really engage. And then what would be kind of one last practical step that you would give?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Make the decision. Just commit to it.
Yeah.
And you can always change your mind later. But I think when you have the mindset of, hey, I'm going to try and do my best to be content here, to be rooted here, to find some people, you approach it with a very different perspective of, instead of, like, recognizing that you're not just a church goer, but you are the church. And so you can be a part of it. And so you can be plugged in and be like joining a life group and serving and everything that you said, just committing to that and saying like, hey, I want to be a part of, like, if there's things that you want, like if you want to join the welcome team because you're like, oh, it could be a little bit more welcoming here, join the welcome team and and be welcoming, be the person, be the change that you want to see. Is like super cliche, but it's true. And so just be committed and see what the Lord can do for that.
Yeah, I could tell story upon story of people that I've known that have gone into places that wasn't anything like where they came from, but they said, yeah, my goal isn't to make it like that, but I want to bring something from there. And so my friend Matt went to a church. They didn't have small groups. He went to the pastor and said, hey, do you guys have any small groups? Do you have any? And he's like, no. And he's like, well, can I start one? And he's like, yes. And from that, he became the small group director, and he was part-time on staff. And like, he built a small group structure where they had several small groups meeting. That didn't happen until he got there. And I think that can be the story again and again when we say, I'm not just here to attend. I'm here to be the church. I'm here to lean in. I want to be a part of the church vision. So yeah, make that decision and commit. Be an encouragement to your pastor. Like, as a pastor, when people are new and they just bring encouragement, and like, that's so helpful. Like, that just it makes it all like, oh, okay, what we're doing is making a difference. And so just find those ways to do that. And then also, just one last thing, like resisting that temptation to attend your old church online. Like, online church is a beautiful thing, but it's not the body we're supposed to be plugged into. Stay connected with those people, but once you move to that new town, as quickly as possible, start to find a church that you can be in person with, that you can do life with people, and then just maintain those relationships the best you can. But you need that place where you live to be the focus. So I know there's lots of other things that we could talk about this, just even dealing with church hurt from the past, like just starting fresh. Like, I think it's like coming to college. To an extent, you get a new experience. Like, you get to come in, it's a bit of a blank slate. Don't bring the feelings you have towards a past experience to a new people. Like, God wants to do something new in your life, and these people he's placed and planted for a reason. So do your best to enter that. But I know we could go on and on and on, but we got to bring this thing to an end. And so I just want to encourage you, if this is you, just lean into this experience. Be prayerful. We're praying for you. If you are looking for a church, let us know. We would love to pray with you. If you have any advice for people, even just throw it on at Instagram, goingsomewhere.podcast, because I think it's fun when the community can support each other. So we just love to hear from you of what your experience has been like in this area. Make sure you subscribe, leave a review, and share with a friend that might need it. But hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Going Somewhere podcast. We'll see you real soon.